This afternoon we're going to shift gears just a little bit because for the next part of our program we're going to be talking about an application of rotary wing aviation that was at once responsible for its developmental phase and the acceleration of its development, and in turn was dramatically altered by the very developments that it had fostered. This morning we talked about you can have an invention, but unless that invention has value that's known about, it really isn't an innovation. Well, this afternoon we're here to talk about military innovation and rotary wing aircraft. And that's an important topic because it has literally changed the face of our world. We have two speakers this afternoon who I think are among the best qualified that I've ever spoken with, who will tell us from two very different perspectives about this. But before we start that, I want to call on some of our special visitors who are here with us from the RAF Museum in the UK to give us about a 5-minute talk about what they are doing here in the US and with Boeing, and how they are seeing this program and seeing what we do in the US and how it's made an impression on them. So if I can ask you folks to come forward, please. Microphone is yours.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon. My name is Daniel Perks and Carl Anderton, and we're part of an apprentice scheme back in the UK which specialises in working with heritage aircraft and restoring them to, well, their former glory. Basically, this is my training manager, Mick Shepherd, and the reason we're on this apprenticeship is because some of the old hand skills and the old ways of doing things are being lost, obviously, as technology grows and advances. So some of the old techniques and skills that were learned are being lost. So we're basically on the apprenticeship to bring those skills back and introduce young people into heritage aviation. So, Carl?
Okay. We work with mainly metallic-based aircraft, aluminum aircraft, and our hand skills are evidently in metal work and banging a sheet of metal, etc., etc. The idea of coming out over here to the US was to be able to take a break from that and work with composite. Now, last year we had interns come over here and they worked on doing repairs on a composite aircraft. Instead, this year we come over here and we were given the task to manufacture a snowboard. And at first it was a snowboard, okay. However, then we realised that after visiting Boeing plants, that the process in making a snowboard compared to the repair on a composite aircraft is exactly the same. The workshop, they both looked similar, and you both used the same materials, and making the snowboard sort of gave it a bit of fun to it as well, something to take home with us. We've been travelling, we've been to Seattle, Massachusetts, Maine, and now here in Philadelphia. We've visited all the Boeing sites that we possibly know of, and we even got to look at the 787 line, the new composite airliner, and got to see some of their repairs, which, well, it's immaculate, and it's new for us because one day we're working on a World War II bomber, the next day we can be working on a MH53 that's, quite recent, and then following that we could be working on a composite aircraft, which is the Typhoon we have in London. So different variables of different aircraft. You want to?
I'll come in if you want. Yeah. I think Kyle and Dan have summed it up quite well, really. The trustees of our museum, and we have 300 exhibits on show today, probably 3 times as many in our reserve collections, and a bunch of aircraft on loan to various museums around the world. The people who work on them, like these guys here, are volunteers. And we now know, our trustees have realised we need young people coming in from the beginning. So the apprenticeship programme involves the guys going to school part-time and working hand in hand on the same bench as an old-fashioned craftsman. So they're learning heritage skills that, like I say, we want to put it in at the grassroots level. But we know that we may not be able to offer them employment. So part of this exchange program is to expose them to the rest of aviation, what the possibilities may be in the future. And the possibilities really are endless, because Phil Dunsford down at Boeing here, the man in charge, was an ex-apprentice from the UK. So the possibilities are there. What the guys didn't say is our museum has got an American arm, an American foundation, and members of Boeing executives are on that board. A number of eminent Americans are on that board, and they sponsor an exchange between a couple of students in Seattle, in this case, come to our museum and work with us, and this is the return leg. And on this leg, they've seen some tremendous things. They've seen areas of Boeing that many of the Boeing management have not seen. We were hosted on a corporate jet that just flew us three across the States to the East Coast, where we were hosted by a bunch of people called the Collins Foundation, who run the Wings of Freedom, and they fly a B-24, B-17, P-51, and we managed to fly and work with them. So we've had a great trip, and thanks Bob Torgerson for helping out on the American end and Boeing, and today it's fantastic to be in such eminent company. Thank you.
It's programs like that and programs that emphasize apprenticeship skills in our schools that will give the next generation of our students an opportunity to learn what it is to be innovative and hands-on. We have lots of students who know how to be hands-on with a computer keyboard and design code and write it. And sadly, in my own high school, which is in this area, the place where the metal shop used to be is no more. It is now a jewelry shop, and I'm not saying anything bad about jewelry, but the 1934 Delta milling machine that I rebuilt when I was a student there is gone, and I have no idea where it is, and I'm sad about it all the time. Our next speaker could hardly be more qualified for his subject. Pete Peterson enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1969, graduated from Parris Island in 1970, was in Vietnam with the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Division. He has been just about everywhere in marine aviation, and that includes his stint as a pilot flying, well, one of the most important people in the world from place to place. Pete holds 2 master's degrees, one in National Security and Strategic Studies from the Naval War College, the other in International Relations from Salve Regina University. He is a commercial pilot, single engine and multi-rating and instrument rated, and I'd like to warm welcome for Pete Peterson.
Thank you, folks. I appreciate being here. I'd like to thank Lawrence for that nice introduction. I'd like to thank him also for being asked to come here to speak, as well as Bob Beggs from the American Helicopter Museum. It's really a pleasure to do so, and I consider it an honor. I would also like to thank you folks that are in the audience. You folks are teachers, science, history. I saw the hands go up before we started here today. My background in teaching, I have to tell you just a little bit, because I had my undergrad work is in education. And my father by trade, most of his adult life, was a university professor, so it was kind of in the blood. I really liked it in high school, and I really wanted to be a teacher. So I went to college, and the first couple years right out of high school, I did really, really terrible. I mean, I was just not ready for college, so they asked me to leave. They said you got 2 choices. You can either quit and do something else, or you can go part-time and bring up your GPA. And I said, well, the heck with you, I'm going in the Marine Corps. So I went to Vietnam for, I did a couple years enlisted in Vietnam, and by that time I saw the light. Came back and finished my last 2 years of college. With very good GPA, by the way. And but during that time, you had to do a student teaching. And at that time, it was about 1972, 73. And I did my student teaching. And having been a Marine for 2 years, and I did my student teaching at that time of our history, the kids just weren't respectful. They just didn't like where I was coming from. So once again, I said, the heck with it. I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to go back in the Marine Corps and fly airplanes and helicopters and stuff. So I eventually did that, and my love of aviation, both airplanes and helicopters, stems from both my mom and dad. After World War II, my dad worked for American Airlines, my mother worked for United Airlines, and that's how I got here. I really appreciate the fact of being here, and I'm going to present a little bit. Let's see if I remember how to do this here. Present a little bit of history along with some dialogue, so it won't get too boring. And I do have some pictures in here because I know everybody loves pictures. And since this is an informal get-together, I'd like to say if you have any questions or anything, please just raise your hand or jump up or throw your water bottle at me. That's okay too. What I'm going to try and cover here regarding HMX1 is the history of HMX1, the aircraft that it flies, the organization. And organization, we have white side and green side. I'll go into a little bit of nuts and bolts about that later, but essentially the white side is the presidential lift, which you all see on the South Lawn and so forth. But the green side is another very important aspect of HMX1 also, which I'll go into more details later. And then we're going to do a short film clip right at the end, about 2 minutes, about HMX1. What does HMX1 do? What is their mission? Their primary mission is to support the White House, the President, members of Cabinet, and VIPs. That's what you folks see on the news. That's where they get their most visibility. But the other mission that they have is also operational test and evaluation. And I'm going to get into both of these things as we go along here, because the OT&E part of it is very, very important and is essential to everything that Marine One does in support of the President. I'll show you that later. Back in the day, around 1946, we had a general named Roy Geiger. And I'll digress just a second. Some of you probably remember seeing the World War II movies about the Marines landing on the beach. They climb down off the ships and get into landing craft, and they go across the beach, and they fight the enemy and close with and destroy and so forth. Well, in 1946, Roy Geiger was at the Bikini Atoll, and he witnessed the testing of the atomic bomb. So he's thinking to himself, gee whiz, if one of those bombs were detonated or went off while the Marines or the Army were coming across the beach, that would really decimate all of our troops and we wouldn't be able to accomplish our mission. So in light of that, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, CMC, this was explained to the Commandant, and he said, they convened the Hugabum board, and they specifically said after that the recommendation was, and the Commandant said, you will establish an experimental squadron and you will develop transport helicopters. And that's how the Marines and HMX1 got started in the helicopter business. And the HMX1 was established in December 1947 at Quantico, and there were a couple reasons for establishing the helicopter squadron at Quantico. It was very close to the Sikorsky and Piasecki plants, and also Quantico, for those of you who don't know it, it's about 30 miles south of DC, is the primary base in the Marine Corps from which all of your major schooling is done. The Amphibious Warfare School's there, Command and Staff College is there, the Marine Corps Combat Development Center is there, and that's where they develop doctrine and how we do things in the Marine Corps and procedures. The innovators are there for process improvement. Gee whiz, we did it, we did it this way back in Vietnam. We did it this way in Grenada and the first Gulf War. We did it this way, but gee whiz, now we're in the next Gulf War. So they continually improve things. That's what the Marine Corps Combat Development Center does in Quantico. Back when we first started this, the Commandant directed that we make or get transport helicopters, and for that reason that Roy Geiger came up with is that we wanted to be able to put, instead of just landing our Marines on the beach, we wanted to have another way of landing Marines too, to help lessen the possibility of everybody being wiped out by one single bomb. So in order to do that, one of HMX's jobs is to test the capability or test the concept of doing this. And back at that time, HMX operated the Sikorsky HO3, which you see there on your left, and the Piasecki HPR1, which of course is the forerunner to the 46 and the Chinook. So they're into testing the concept right now, or the capability. So what they did was back in 1948, they had 66 Marines were put on the USS Peleliu, and they transported them by helicopter from the USS Peleliu onto Onslow Beach, North Carolina, which is right down near where Camp Lejeune is in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Now, when they did this, it was very successful, but they only carried 3 Marines per helicopter. So it took them a little while to do it. So, gee whiz, this is going to take a long time to put a lot of force on the beachhead that we need. So how are we going to do this? So, at the same time, our friends Mr. Sikorsky and Mr. Piasecki are developing helicopters. They're creating bigger ones. They're creating stronger ones that can carry more lift. So we have kind of a two-pronged approach at this. And by the way, just as a point of interest, I'm saying that in case there are any Army folks in here. The Marine Corps in 1948, they first developed the manual for vertical assault. And I want you to note that the Marine Corps, being different from every other branch of the service, oops. No, it was only a clip, no problem. Marine Corps, being different from every other branch of the service, decided they had to have a different name for this evolution. The Army calls it air assault or airborne assault. Marine Corps has to be different. So they call it vertical envelopment. So when you see the Marines landing on the beach, coming across by water, and then you see them landed by helicopters, that whole thing is called a vertical envelopment. As our engineering improved with helicopters and so forth, the HMX's role evolved into an OT&E. Normally you have developmental testing. Okay, the engineers are doing their thing and so forth, and you do a developmental test of it, to see if it works on the bench and so forth. But then to really test it in the fleet, to see if it works when you're out there actually hauling Marines around, you have to do the operational test part of it. And that entails if whatever box or whatever improvement it is, that you're actually putting that on the aircraft, you're actually carrying Marines and doing an operational test. So that's a very, very important part of HMX1. The last bullet I had on there, I did it just as a kind of a pick your brain kind of thing. We talk about the innovativeness and the engineering and so forth of our historical vertical flight engineers and pioneers, but for this particular instance here, for the Marine Corps and the Marine Corps' needs, what do you think? What drove this thing? Technology, or did the requirement? Thank you, Colonel. Thank you. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. It's kind of different. I was trying to think of a different, something different, but the requirement drove this because we needed to put Marines in a place aside from the coming across the beach where they would not be where they hopefully wouldn't get in harm's way, as opposed to, well, gee whiz, when Alexander Graham Bell was developing the phone or Edison was developing the light bulb, that was being innovative, but was there a requirement there to do that? I'm not sure. So that's the flip side of this. Back in 1950, the Marines sent 4 helicopters over to Korea, and and they were very, very instrumental in the Battle of the Pusan Perimeter. And some of the things they did, among other things, is, as you can read them up there, I can't even read them myself, battlefield observation and control. You know, they were forward observers for artillery, forward observers for mortars and so forth. They did medical evacuations. They rescued downed pilots and crew, which was the forerunner of SAR, or search and rescue operations. And they were also a liaison between a lot of the units along the Chosin Reservoir. So that was probably the Marines' first experience in combat was the Korean War, using helicopters, that is. Back at that time, all of the training for the Marines was done, flight training was done where? Pensacola, Florida. Pensacola, Florida. Marines, the Navy, and the Coast Guard do their flight training in Pensacola, Florida. At that particular time, the flight school was saturated, so HMX1 was tasked with training their own pilots. And that wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but they did train their own pilots for the first few years of the war. And they also trained the first cadre that would make up the first helicopter transport squadron, which was HMR 161. And we have all seen the president get on and off Marine One about 1 million times on the South Lawn and various other places throughout the United States and the world. But where did that come from? Why did that happen? Well, back in '57, President Eisenhower had his little vacation home up in Newport, Rhode Island. It's a great place to visit, by the way. And he needed to get back to the White House as soon as possible. And the ferry ride, before they built they have a bridge going across Narragansett Bay now, but before that, back in '57, there was no bridge, so he had to take about an hour's ferry ride, you know, followed by a 45-minute Air Force One flight, followed by 20 minutes of a motorcade, but he needed to be back there now. So it just so happens they had an H-34 stationed on the other side of Narragansett Bay just for emergencies. So the bottom line is, he asked if there was any way that he could get across the bay faster. And they said, yeah, we have this helicopter here. Why don't you get on that? And we'll get you across real fast to Air Force One. So they did that. And they got him across there and everything. And that's how HMX1 got started as being the first presidential lift helicopter.
That's over in Restoration at Seahorse.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Okay, wow. Whereabouts?
Restoration.
Okay.
Quantico.
At Quantico? Okay, very good, very good. That's a neat bit of history I didn't know. Thank you. So after the president had his first ride across Narragansett Bay, they said, well, what the heck? Why can't we land this on the South Lawn? So he asked the naval aide at that particular time if they could do that. They went in, took all the measurements, and did a couple practice runs, and lo and behold, we can land the H-34 on the South Lawn, and there was plenty of room, plenty of safety. So that became a precedent for the helicopter coming on and off the South Lawn. Just as a note of interest here, this job was shared by the U.S. Army up until 1976, and then the Marine Corps took it over completely. The aircraft of HMX1, what do they fly? And I'll go from past to present. Back in '57, they had the VH-34 Choctaw, and that was the official presidential helicopter. Then in '62, they went to the VH-3A, and then in the late '70s, that VH-3 was upgraded to the VH-3D, and that held 14 passengers. And the current fleet at HMX1 is comprised of the VH-3D Sea King and the VH-60 Whitehawk. And the Whitehawk entered service in 1988, and it was really, when I was making this presentation, I totally forgot about it, but back when I worked at the White House, and I have a little correction to make here for Lawrence, I really did not fly the president. I was not part of HMX1. My job, and the reason why I know this stuff is because for 3 years I was the Marine Corps aide to President Reagan. The president has 5 aides, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and Coast Guard. So for 3 years I was his aide. Anyway, back to my story. The White Hawk, the VH-60N, I think it was about 1986, they asked a couple of us aides to go over there and see how they would lay out the cabin for the president, which I thought was pretty neat. You know, like, okay, Pete, where do you think we should put the commander-in-chief? Where do you think we should put the toilet? How about the stove? It doesn't have a stove, really. I'm just kidding. But it was I just happened to think of that as I was making this presentation, and it was pretty neat to be a little part of aviation history and the aircraft that they're using in HMX1 right now. I thought that was good. Just a little bit of background as far as what do these VHs and all that stuff stand for. The V that designates the aircraft is configured for a VIP, and both the VH-3D and the VH-60 can be loaded in either the C-5 Galaxy or the C-17 Globemaster. The VH-3 takes about less than 24 hours to break down because they have to take off some rotors and stuff like that to fit it on the Galaxy. But the VH-60s, the White Hawks, they just fold those things up, tow them in 2 hours you're gone. And the reason why I bring this up is, and I'll go into a little bit more detail later on, is because the Marine Corps', the HMX1's mission, you know, is not just taking them off the South Lawn and everything. Their mission is global. They go all over the world with these helicopters to support the president. You know, and I'll go into some nuts and bolts of that later on. And what I would also like to say for these particular aircraft that fly the president, all of those folks, the pilots and maintenance training, they are all done by Sikorsky factory-trained instructors. Okay. Just as a bit of history, this was canceled, but HMX1 was scheduled to get the new VH-71 Kestrel, but in April of this year, DoD canceled that. My personal opinion is I'm so glad because I just can't picture anything else other than a Sikorsky aircraft landing on the South Lawn. That's my personal opinion. The CH-46 Sea Knight and the 53 Super Stallion, they're also with HMX1, and they use them for utilities. And just so you know, these 46s and 53s, you probably won't see them on you might see them in the news on a presidential lift, but when the president goes somewhere and he's aboard Marine One, what the staff and the people that plan this stuff, what happens is they put the press corps on the CH-47 or the 53. So Marine One lifts off with the president, and you got the press corps and everything behind them, and then they will leap ahead and be in the zone well before the president gets there, so they can take their pictures and so forth. So these aircraft, the 46 and the 53, are used in addition to supporting the Marines at Quantico. They are used for the presidential mission, if you will. Yes.
As an Air Force guy, you know, I know we're flying airframes that are 50 years old. Now we're not going to replace it, so what's the shelf life? How long can you keep flying it before it just can't be repaired anymore?
That's a very good question. These 34s that we're flying, or the H3s that we're flying right now, have seen a life of well over 30 years. And what most people don't know with these things is all of the aircraft, the white tops that fly the president, all of their parts and everything are half-life. In other words, if you got a rotor head and you can put 2,000 hours on it before you have to do maintenance on it, well, HMX, they do maintenance on it or replace it at 1,000 hours. So every part on the presidential lift helicopter has a half-life for all of their parts. And when these aircraft do go into a major phase or an overhaul, that aircraft is taken apart completely down to the last nut and bolt. It is all refurbished. They are replaced, and essentially it's like a brand new aircraft rolling off the Sikorsky line. That's why they look so good. Other than the fact that those Marine maintainers down there are out there shining it up. Wax on, wax off. And that is a great picture of a VH-50 or a VH-3. The organization, as far as the organization of Marine One goes, it is considered an experimental squadron. That's why the X is on there. The H means helicopter, the M means Marine, and the X means experimental. They are the only organization responsible for supporting the White House. And they have about 700 or so, well over 700 people in that squadron. And the squadron has flown more than 273,000 flight hours in support of our president throughout his lifetime. And I might